Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Liz Lang. Each week on this podcast, we will break down various aspects of mental health. We are so excited you're here and hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey guys, Liz Lang here, and this week I am very excited to introduce to you Jeremiah and Selina Woodruff. So they are with Core Connection, and they are life coaches. So I am going to go ahead and let them introduce what Core Connection is and what they do as life coaches.
Awesome. Thank you. We are so excited to be here. So we are a mental wellness business that offers life and family coaching classes and workshops. We are certified family life coaches. I am a life coach certified through the Life Coach School, and we are parents of 7 wonderful children, 2 son-in-laws, and 3 grandkids. So our children have given us lots of life experiences to learn and grow from that have given us this knowledge that we have now.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. We're excited to be here and to share some of our experiences with you and with your audience. I am just wrapping up a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, and I did my undergrad studies in marriage and family studies. And like Selina said, we have lots of children with lots of experience, and we're excited to talk a little bit about that with you today.
Awesome. Okay, so which brings me to today's topic, which is why teens communicate the way they do. So our main focus is going to be basically just effective ways to communicate with teens and how to talk to them. And the teen years can be hard. I remember being a teen and it's hard. And then anybody who's dealing with teenagers knows that it can be really tough. So let's start with first a little bit of background in teen development. We know that the main goal for being a teenager, their main goal in life is to figure out who they are, build their identity. How does that affect the way they communicate?
Well, it affects them significantly. So when we look at Erikson's psychosocial stages, an adolescent, typically the ages of 12 to 18 and sometimes up to 20 years old, they go through this identity versus confusion stage of life. And so they're trying to figure out who they are, and they're trying to gain their independence. And so they tend to pull away from mom and dad a little bit when it comes to communication. And as any of you know, when you're talking with teens, we get a lot of the responses or okay. Or if you ask them, how was your day? Fine.
Yep.
You're not going to get a whole lot more than that most of the time. But we want to talk about some strategies on how to manage that a little bit and how to communicate a little bit better and develop relationships with them that will last through adulthood.
And I think one thing, too, to keep in mind is when you get all these monosyllables from your teens, you might happen to hear them talking with their friends, and you're like, who is this person and where did all of these words come from? I didn't know they knew that many words. And I think it's important as a parent not to take that personal, because another important aspect of the teenage years that can be hard for parents is this aspect where friends become everything to them. And in a way, friends sometimes become more important than family to them, right? And that's just kind of a fact of teen life. So how do parents navigate that? And how do they help meld that need for, no, your family does still matter, but I understand that your friends are important too?
So what was really helpful for me, what I learned and was taught, somebody told me, was that my kids still do need me, but it's like math. I'm addition and subtraction, right?
Yeah.
And now they're on to algebra. So it's not that they don't need the addition and subtraction, but now they're learning something new and they're getting that validation and they're getting that acceptance outside of me because they already know that I love and accept them. So they're seeking that outside of me to figure out who they are.
Yeah, because identity achievement, that's what happens in the teenage years. And it can be rough. it can be really rough and it can be really hard for teens.
Certainly, and along with that is it's a very natural portion of development for teens to start to feel that what their friends think is more important than their parents. And that's normal. It's not necessarily a bad thing. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're testing the waters in different areas. They know how mom and dad feel. They know what mom and dad believe and think and what they want them to do, but they're checking out the rest of the world, and they need the space to do that. They need the opportunity to do that. So as parents, we want to be careful not to take that personally, because it isn't personal. It's just part of their development stage.
Yes, yes. Okay, so let's talk about, well, effectively communicating with teens or practical strategies for better communication, right? So now, one of the things that I think is important to talk about is most of good parenting strategies for teens often starts when they are younger, right? They start when they are kids. And so a lot of times what people run into is they're like, I have this teen and I don't know what to do with them. I don't know how to talk to him anymore because I don't know, right? And so you are where you are, and you can't change where you are. You can't change what happened in the past, but it's never too late to start improving your relationship with your teen. So what does that look like? How do you start?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Liz. I think as we look at that, certainly the way we communicate with our children when they're young definitely plays a role in it, but sometimes it's almost like overnight. My kid yesterday talked to me just fine, and today they're a whole different person, and the communication is different, and it's challenging. And we start to move from this role where we are their primary influence to more of a mentorship role, or even a partnership role, when our teens move from that early grade school time in life into that adolescent stage. And so the communication has to change a little bit. I think that, the typical things that we do as life coaches, or that counselors would even do, is practice those active listening skills or things of that nature, right? Reflecting feelings. But I think some of the big keys is that we give them our attention. And I know, especially for me as a dad, I come home from work or whatever, I sit down on the couch and maybe I'm on my phone and my kids are talking to me and we're only halfway listening. I think one of the big keys there is that if they are going to talk to us, we have to give them our attention. We have to actively be participating in the conversation and looking at them and paying attention to what they're saying. And it kind of leads me to another piece of this topic, is that a lot of times when our teens want to talk to us, they want to talk about things that are interesting to them that are probably not interesting to us, right?
Yes.
Like my kids, some of them just love video games. I can't stand video games. They'll talk for hours about video games. So finding a way to communicate on their level really opens the door for them to communicate about more important things when the time is right for them.
Right. Yeah. So here is a real life scenario for teens and communication, right? That I think is going to be really applicable to probably a lot of parents. So my oldest, we were having this big conversation around internet safety, right? And learning about the world and how you safely learn about the world, and that the internet is not the correct place to find information, right?
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, but I don't know if I can trust you guys to talk about the big important things. So when your adolescent or your teenager says that, I mean, first of all, again, and I didn't take this personal, because I won't pretend it didn't hurt a little bit, but I understand that it wasn't about me. And I think that's what a mistake that parents of teens sometimes make, is they internalize everything and they try to look at, what did I do wrong? It's not about you, it's about them, right? And how you help them. So what's your strategy for that? How do you help them, right? How do you be a safe space? Or what are your thoughts on just saying, okay, if I'm not a safe person, who can we identify that is a safe person for you to talk to, right? Because I remember, I've shared this before on the podcast, I remember in high school, my senior year, I went through this dark, really difficult period where I I was deeply unhappy. I didn't like my parents at all. I refused to talk to them. And my mom, in desperation, called the church leader because she just wanted somebody to talk to me and somebody I would talk to. And in hindsight, I am so grateful to my mom for doing that for me and for giving me some safe space that she knew that could be trusted, right? So tell me your thoughts on all this.
Well, I want to say, first of all, you recognizing and realizing not making it personal is huge. So a lot of times in situations and scenarios like this, when you step back and say, what am I making this mean about me, is a big question, right? Because it helps check where you are and where your emotions are and where you're operating from. So if you can operate from a space of this is not about me, then you can turn that to compassion and curiosity towards your child. Why would she say that? What is she experiencing? What is her thoughts? And then giving her the ownership on that would be something like, well, what do you think? Who do you trust that you could talk to this about this to, this situation, the big life things, right? So instead of trying to control and be the one, you're allowing that opportunity, like you said, for having that experience to have other people influence in their life. And they feel like they're controlling and they're choosing that, you not telling them.
Which is a good point because autonomy is a huge factor for teens. They're trying to become autonomous from their parents. And for a lot of parents, that's really hard because we control so much of our kids' lives when they are young, right? I mean, I control almost every aspect of my 5-year-old's day. He doesn't get a choice in a whole lot. But, my 8-year-old, she gets a little more say. My 12-year-old, right? Like we're starting to have to let her make those choices. And it can be hard and it can be scary for parents. So another thing that I think is always worth talking about with teens is validation does not always mean I agree with you. So a lot of times teens will say something and they'll be like, wait, where did this come from? That's not what I taught you. And they're going to think and believe differently than you. And that's okay. And so I think it is so important for parents to recognize you can say, I understand where you're coming from. It doesn't have to mean I agree with you, right?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think Selina said something really critical there when she said coming from a place of curiosity.
Yeah.
We spend the majority of our children's lives, and at least for the first 10, 11, 12 years of really kind of like you talked about, Liz, dictating what they do and how they do it. And we tend to lecture. When we move into that teenage phase, they're kind of past that. While we still want to maybe control what they're doing, they no longer want you in the driver's seat in their lives. They want, like you said, autonomy. They want this freedom to make their own choices. They want to explore and learn about the world. They're figuring out who they are. So giving them that space to figure that out and coming to them with curiosity, with questions, like you're talking about your daughter and her wanting to search on the internet, and maybe just asking her questions about that. What are you trying to learn about? Is there somebody you would be willing to talk about? I have to applaud your mom and having the guts to reach out to a religious leader and have her talk to you. But another option there could be to go to your daughter and say, is there somebody you would want to talk to that we could agree upon, and help her be in that driver's seat and make those decisions rather than you dictating what's happening in her life. And I think it's at this point, it's really important to recognize that, we work with all kinds of different people, and our experience has taken us all over in different directions with different challenges within families. And there's no one answer to these questions. So every family is unique. Every individual is unique. We're coming up on our fifth teenager, and every one of them has been significantly different from the other. And some are maybe a little bit easier. Some have greater challenges, but we've had to adjust our parenting to each individual person. And of course, we're growing as parents, right? We're learning, we're developing ourselves. And, one of the things that we often say to our clients is, you've never had a 13-year-old Sammy. You've never had an 18-year-old John. You don't know what you're doing. And so it's a process of learning. and they've never been in life before. They've never experienced that adult life before. And so everybody's learning together, and a little bit of compassion and trying to understand where they're coming from goes a long way.
Yeah, exactly. And, I remember my dad saying to me, "Oh, I tried to treat all of you guys equally. None of us agreed we were treated equally." Right.
Nope.
And it's just perspective. And to be fair, and I can look back in hindsight and think, okay, he genuinely tried to, but the reality is, I mean, my dad, he had 5 kids, and he had to treat all of them completely individual and uniquely.
Yep.
And that's just a fact of life. Okay, so let's shift gears to handling conflict with teens. This is inevitable. It is just a fact of life. At some point, you are going to have a conflict with your teen over something you already are, or you probably have a million times. So I'm going to guess that your first strategy, or your first I guess, tip is to remain calm no matter what they've done. And that can be hard, because when your kid backs your truck into the driveway, that's a conflict, and that's going to be really hard to handle, right? And so sometimes teens do something that really push boundaries or really make us mad. And not that we have to be perfect, right? And I think that's another important point today is, this is not about guilt tripping parents or making them feel guilty, like they're doing it wrong. This is tools and information to help you progress, right? So talk to me about calmly parenting.
First, I want to say you can be upset if your kid backs the truck into the garage. Absolutely. Why do we need to not be upset, right?
Yeah.
We're not trying to change. We're not trying to change human emotions here. Of course, you're going to be upset. And then you don't beat yourself up that you're upset. Of course, you're upset. You tell yourself, of course, I'm upset about this, right? But what we want to handle is the way we're coming to that situation. So even if it's like, I'm really upset right now, so I am going to take some time because I don't want to respond in a way that I don't want to, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really getting into the mindset of, who do I want to be and how do I want to show up? And that really comes from your thoughts. We're not just trying to keep calm all the time.
Right.
We're human beings, and we have emotions, and we're not trying to get rid of negative emotions. But when it comes to general overall life, how do you want to operate as a parent? Do you want to operate coming from calm, or do you want to be coming into those situations in high emotions?
And I really love what Selina has said there, and I think it's super important. I do want to back up just for a second and appreciate what you said, Liz, about, there's no judgment here. I definitely would make the top of the list for how parents shouldn't respond in situations like that. It is certainly a struggle for all of us.
Yeah.
And it's okay. And we can learn to move forward and work through that. But I think that one of the important things to consider when we're looking at difficult situations, maybe a kid makes a really poor choice. Your 17-year-old daughter comes home from a party and she's been drinking. That's really upsetting as a parent. But at the same time, we might consider what she's going through and what she's experiencing, because she may be just as disappointed in herself as you are, or more. And we tend to forget that as parents. And so it's just a great opportunity to ask questions of curiosity again, and understanding. And of course, we have to have boundaries, and that's definitely a conversation for another day, to talk about boundaries, developing those with our kids. And there's going to be some consequences there, but berating your child because they made a really poor choice isn't going to help the situation. When your emotions are high, their emotions are high, nobody makes good decisions. And we can talk about what happens in the brain there when emotions are heightened, and our inability at that point to make good decisions and to make sound decisions. And it's even more challenging for a teenage kid. And so remaining calm is helpful, but you certainly are going to experience emotions. You're going to be significantly disappointed when your kid backs the truck into the garage, or your daughter comes home and has been drinking. You're going to be upset about those things, and you should be. You're going to be disappointed. You should be. We have to be careful not to try and remove the natural emotions that are a part of who we are. We don't want to get rid of those. We want to learn how to work within those emotions.
Right. And again, one thing that we do know about good communication, it is listen, validate, and empathy, right? And you kind of have to go in that order, right? So you first have to listen. I mean, if you just start yelling at your teen because they've been drinking, they're likely to just shut you off. And certainly if you do it while they are still inebriated, they're likely not even to remember it. So probably don't try. But no matter what the situation is, right? Is if you go into lecture mode, they're going to immediately tune you out. So, but if you come at it from, okay, tell me what happened, right? Or maybe even start with, how much have you had? Do we need to be concerned about anyone else, right? Is anybody out there driving drunk right now? Or did you take anything else that we need to be concerned about? Did you have any other encounters with somebody else? Like, right, maybe if you come at it from I want to make sure that you and your friends are safe, that's might be a really great place to start, just because it shows that you're more concerned about them than this choice that they made.
Certainly, but I think you could actually take it a little bit further as well and get into more of the when the conversations do happen, well, what did you think about it? How did this help you? Is this helping you achieve the goals that you want? Is this something that you feel like is a good thing for your life? And we got to be a little bit careful about the hundreds of questions, right? Now they're just trying to find out information about me rather than really coming from that place of curiosity. Because how much did you drink? Yeah, that may be important, but you're probably going to know, right? You're going to know how bad off they are or they're not. And once they're at a place where you can have that conversation, then we can talk about those things. And certainly we want to keep other kids safe if possible. It's interesting that you bring this up. You talked a little bit about your daughter not trusting you, right? I don't trust you with those big things. And one of the ways that we build trust with our teens is the way we respond when things happen. So if your kid comes to you and says, "Hey, I messed up. I skipped class today because, I just didn't want to go and I was having a bad day," and you freak out and you lecture them and, you've got to be in class and you can't do this. What that's telling your teen is that, okay, so if I come to mom and dad with something really big, they're really going to freak out. But if they come to you and say, "Yeah, I skipped class," and you say, "Oh, yeah, well, what was going on? Why'd you skip class?" "Oh, I get that. Probably not the best choice, but I understand where you're coming from. What did you learn from that?" And we just move forward because it's probably not that big of a deal.
Well, to add to that, it might be a big deal to you, right?
It might be.
So if you have those boundaries and expectations, you just follow through with the consequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to just be like, "Oh, it's fine that you did that. Let's follow through." Maybe it's not in your family. It's not a big deal and you just work through that. But if that is something that is a boundary and an expectation, there's a consequence that follows with that.
Definitely. And Selena's absolutely right. We want to follow through with those consequences, but the way we respond really is critical. And if we have the consequences and the boundaries established, then it's not a surprise to them that there's a consequence, but we don't have to make it into something more. We just follow through with the consequence and we build the trust so that when something big does happen, you know what, I am going to be in trouble, but I know I can talk to mom or I can talk to dad about it. And we can start to build that trust with them to where they will actually communicate those things to us.
Yeah, so I have a really good practical real world application for this. So when I was a freshman in high school, I got into this silly situation with the boy and we were kind of cuddly and doing things that I knew I shouldn't have been doing, right? Because my parents had very strict rules about dating and interactions with boys. And I knew I had broken the boundary, right? I had broken the rule, so to speak. I was terrified that somehow my dad was going to find out. And I went to him and I told him what happened and I was convinced he was going to blow up. He didn't at all. And I could tell that my dad, like going into high school, was starting to freak my dad out because, right? I mean, me and the teenage boys, I could sense it. Anyway, so I really thought he was going to blow up. He didn't at all. He handled it and he kind of made it a learning experience. And he's like, this is why I've set these boundaries. And from then on, I was never afraid to go to him when I messed up. In fact, I later learned it's a lot worse if he hears about it from somebody else. It's better if I go to him and say, "I screwed up and this is what happened, and he's much likely to handle it in a better way. So when your kids go to you and when they own up to their mistakes, I mean, praise that and encourage that. And, thank you for telling me. I appreciate that you felt like you could share that with me, and, do your absolute best to handle it calmly so they'll continue coming to you in the future.
Yeah, no, that's great advice and a great direction. And I agree. We need to, as parents, praise those times. And that is how we build the trust. And it doesn't mean that there's not a consequence for the bad decision, or there's not, some sort of boundary that was broken there. But again, we don't have to bring emotion into the consequence. We don't have to blow up and yell and scream. We probably are inside. I bet your dad was inside, like freaking out. I have 5 daughters. I know what that's like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough, but certainly being that place where they can come communicate with you can be a powerful tool in developing the relationship with your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I want to backtrack a little bit into strategies for when teens shut down or say, I don't want to talk. Because that can be so hard as a parent, especially when your teen is struggling and they need help and they won't talk to you. So I mean, what do you do, or how can you help navigate that situation?
The experience I've had with that personally is what we kind of already talked about, is relationship. I don't like video games either, but I have children that like video games. And so if that means playing video games with them once a week, the video game that they want to play, and just having that time that you're with them doing what they're wanting to do, that's not lecture time.
Mm-hmm.
Telling them all the wonderful advice you have, because we know we all have wonderful advice to give our children, but just really being there in their world and experiencing what they experience, and let it be them and their control. So whether that's video games or a sport, playing something with them, or a craft, or whatever their interest is, and really just listening to them. I think that those provide those opportunities, maybe not at that time, but later they know that they can talk to you and open up and trust that you're somebody that they can express some of those things to.
Yeah. So one thing, and I don't even remember where I heard this, it was forever ago, is like, is kind of how to handle when your teens like either are into something that you don't appreciate, like maybe it's music that you don't care for, or maybe it's friends. You have this friend that they have this friend that you can't stand, right? Or that you're worried is bad news. Because I mean, the second you tell a teenager, no, you can't do that, they're going to find a way if they really want to. Right? Because that's the thing, is parents tend to think that they can, like, just putting more control on their teenagers is going to fix the problem, and it never does. Because you can't lock them in their room forever. Eventually, they're going to leave your house and they're going to do what they're going to do. So one of the things that they recommended, or that this person said, is ask them about it. Say, hey, tell me about this music. Why do you like this music? Or, tell me about these friends and, what's important to them, or what do you guys like to do? Or what do you guys talk about, or whatever it is. So find a way to connect on their level with them, right? With whatever they're into.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's critical, especially understanding this idea. And the idea is that you can't force them to do anything. You can't force them to talk to you. And really, what value is there if you could? There isn't any, right? They're not going to give you the information that you really are seeking. And so one of the things that I talk a lot about with clients and with individuals is that once a child gets to a certain stage in life, somewhere in those teen years, our ability to influence them is diminished. So forcing things on them, it just doesn't do any good. It creates additional tension. And so getting them to talk to you when they're shutting down, if you're just trying to force things on them, isn't going to be helpful. So what we say is focus on the relationship. How do you build the relationship? If the relationship's there, you're going to have a greater ability to influence their lives than if you just continue trying to lecture and control every aspect of their life. So like Selina was talking about, play video games with them if they like video games. understand their music. Certainly your kids are probably going to like music you don't like. That's like the nature of the cycle of generations, right? My dad hated my music. It's a little different now. I think my 18-year-old son loves the music that I listened to as a kid. And so it's interesting, but
It's coming back full circle.
it's coming back.
That is amazing.
But yeah, the real strategy there is to develop the relationship, and every family looks different. And that's why it's really hard to just say, hey, do this and it'll work. It may not. You've got to figure out what motivates your kid and what they're interested in, and find ways to communicate on that level about things that are a lot less important. Because sitting next to your maybe 16-year-old son playing a video game that he loves, he's a lot more likely to say something to you has more depth to it than if you're sitting in the living room pointing your finger at him and lecturing him. He's just not going to communicate, right? So we develop that relationship. Now, if you're worried about the safety and well-being of your kid, obviously we might have to take some more drastic measures. And if there's a concern about, suicide or drugs or something like that, certainly we want to make sure that we're getting the help we need. And we may need to include a counselor or possibly a religious leader or somebody else if there's some deep concern there, and keep a close eye on that. So we want to be careful there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't talk about suicide without mentioning the 988 suicide hotline, right? Absolutely. So always a valid option. Okay. So final topic before we wrap up. Let's say your kid is 14, 15, maybe even 16. You feel like you have no relationship with them. Where do you start?
What is your kid like?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of what we already talked about, just finding what they're interested in.
Yeah. And I think it's important to realize that you cannot control your kid. I wish I could teach you how to control your kid, because I would control all of mine and I would be rich, but control our kid. But who can you control? Yourself. Yeah. And relationships really come from our thoughts about the other person. Relationship doesn't come from them and what they think and what they're doing. Relationship comes from our thoughts and what we're doing. We can control ourselves. So you could be sitting playing a video game that your son still isn't talking to you. You're putting forth that effort and you're trying to hey, let's play a video game on Thursday night. You pick which one and he's still not talking to you. So what are your thoughts? Are you just still annoyed? We have no relationship. He's not talking to me. Or hey, I wonder why he's interested in this. Mm-hmm. And your thoughts can be turned to things about him and what you like about him, that sort of thing, right? And so that's where the relationship comes from, is you and your thoughts. And that's what you can control.
Good point. I love that. Focus on what you can control, right? Because you cannot control your adolescent, right? Or you can't control your 16-year-old. They're going to make their decisions. That's the hardest part about parenting, is agency. It is the hardest part about being a parent.
Well, and of course that's going to be frustrating, right? If you think putting forth the effort of oh, hey, my daughter really likes to get her nails done, so I'm going to go spend the time and have her do my nails or whatever. And it ends up in a fight. And you're like, what is the point of this? That's frustrating when you're putting forth that effort. But I guess I just really encourage to check what you're thinking in that situation. What are your thoughts? Because if your thoughts are, this is really frustrating, this is annoying, why am I doing this? Then of course that's the experience you're going to have. And that's what you're going to be experiencing, is those things that you're thinking.
Find the positive.
Definitely. And I think that, we always say parenting teens is so difficult. I love parenting teens. I think teens are the most exciting time of life. I love working with teenagers and being around them. So much of it, like Selina talked about, it just comes from your mindset. It comes from the way you think about the situations. Yes, it's difficult. It can be difficult, and you can also enjoy that time of life. It really depends on what you put into your own mind and your thoughts about it.
Yeah, it's changing the narrative, right? It's the narrative, and narratives are really important. We all create them.
And I'm not talking about sunshine and rainbows all the time.
Nope. It's not
No
going
way.
to happen.
We can think our kid is annoying, and we can be disappointed and frustrated in what's happening. And if it's really hard and you're to the point that you're like, I just can't even stand to sit here and look at them, just sit and tell yourself, I'm just going to sit in their presence and be here with them. Just practice that, right? Because sometimes that is unnatural and uncomfortable for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you have to just sit with the bad and learn to sit with the bad.
Well, just sit and be okay with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Okay. This was a fantastic conversation, and hopefully our listeners found this really helpful. So small changes can make big results. It might take some time, but if you just start making those small changes and start doing those little things, right? Trying to really listen to your teen, trying to connect with them, trying to connect on their level and with their interest, over time, things will get better. Because that's the other thing is because when I think parents, well, in general, we want quick answers, right? Like we want fast results.
Sure.
There's no fast result with parenting.
And it can be overwhelming, right? There's so many different things to do. So I love the small changes piece of it. That's super helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So if you guys are interested in contacting or connecting with Jeremiah and Selina, you can go to coreconnection.org. I will have that linked in our show notes so you can get a hold of them. And Selina, tell me about the consultation.
Yeah, so if you go on our website, you can sign up for a free consultation. Just book a free consultation on there. If you want to talk further about what we talked about and have found it interesting or need some help and direction in which way to go with helping your relationship with your teen. And we can do that just over Zoom, a free consultation if you book on our website.
Yeah, okay. You can also get a hold of us on social media through our website. We have links for all of our social media accounts on our website as well. So,
okay. So again, coreconnection.org, that will be linked in our show notes. And next week, we are going to get into boundaries and independence. We're still going to talk about teenagers. So teens and boundaries can be a really tough one. We're going to get into it, coach you through it a little bit, and we will see you all next week. Have a question? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com.